Hello, my name is Natasha Marling, and today I plan to present the answer to a prompt from EDCS 725, Module 3 and 4. The prompt that I have selected is from Chapman and King, Chapter 12. This prompt says, discuss the quote by Robert Maynard Hutchins. The object of education is to prepare the young to educate themselves throughout their lives. And whenever I chose this prompt, I thought about this a lot in my head as I was reading through all the information. And I decided that my response to this quote is that if the goal of education is to prepare the young to educate themselves throughout their lives, then education should be focused on authentic learning scenarios and teaching students how to think. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to try and show how I came to that conclusion, and I'm going to show evidence that supports my claim. The first thing that I want to do is talk about authenticity in a learning environment and how it prepares students to educate themselves throughout their lives. When researching ideas for this quote, I came across an article called Problematizing the Notion of Authentic School Learning: Insights from Student Perspectives on Media Literacy Education. This article was written by Weininger, who backs up my claim of authenticity in a learning environment preparing students to educate themselves throughout her lives in her article. And this article examines media literacy curriculum in Singapore in relationship to authentic learning, but I really felt that this was a good article to use to back up my point because there were a lot of quotes about what is authentic learning and how it impacts the student. One that stood out to me particularly is authentic school learning also mobilizes learners' existing expertise and experiences as a resource, and it enables the acquisition of knowledge and competencies such as collaboration and problem solving that learners can utilize in subsequent real-world contexts. Weininger also discusses the problematic nature of including authentic learning in the curriculum due to the pressures of high-stakes testing, which can create a system which only values objective, measurable knowledge, greatly narrowing the focus on experiential learning. And I feel like these 2 points are really useful when the idea of thinking about authenticity in a learning environment and how it prepares them for the real world, because she's really pointing out that collaboration and problem solving are skills that you need to be successful in the real world, and the best way to practice this is authentic learning things that mimic what would happen in the real world. And I also brought up the idea of the problematic nature with testing because I think this is one of the main reasons that the United States has not really grabbed hold of this idea in the educational environment. So another piece of evidence that I want to talk about to support my idea is that thinking is key to life success. So Bruno Crostini point out in their book that if you want your child to become a successful thinker, give plenty of opportunities to practice thinking. So we need our students to practice thinking. The best way to do this is in an authentic learning environment, okay? They argue in this book that developing a metacognitive environment in your school can help students do more than pass a test. It can help them for years after they leave school. And this is because if you know how to think, that doesn't magically go away when you leave the school building. However, if you only know how to pick A, B, C, and D, that is not very useful in a real-world context. They also point out in their book that factual knowledge will be forgotten by students. I know that I can't remember hardly anything that I learned in high school, so I don't know why I would expect my students to remember those facts. So instead of focusing on factual knowledge, teachers need to teach students to be thoughtful, lifelong learners. This is an idea that I completely agree with, and that's why I've put it in this presentation. Next, I'm going to talk about some ways to promote thinking. One of these ways is problem-based learning, also known as PBL. And I read about this in Susan Drake's book, Creating Standards-Based Integrated Curriculum. And in her book, she talks about how in the 1980s, it was asserted that students were not being prepared to be productive members of the 21st century. So in reaction to this, the nation began to move towards a more relevant curriculum that focused on real-world situations. she argues that the real world is not divided by discipline, so the best method for creating a real world curriculum is an integration of subjects. And I agree with this full-heartedly, especially now that I'm working on my master's degree, because I see so many more connections between things than I felt I ever saw in high school, because things are really interconnected. And I think this is something that's missed in a lot of not integrated curriculums. Drake even takes this idea further by championing problem-based learning, which students define the problems, which is set in the real world, and then they try to solve them. And here's the quote: "Students who have been taught with the problem-based learning learned more of the 21st century skills than did their counterparts taught traditionally." So this problem-based learning is basically an idea where the student chooses the problem and then tries to solve it. And I think this is a great way to promote thinking amongst our students. On that last slide, I talked about 21st century skills a little bit. And this is really an avenue to promote authentic learning. Though there are multiple ways to view the exact content and definition of 21st century skills, all generally emphasize what students can do with the knowledge and how they apply what they learn in authentic contexts. Their essence involves strong communication and collaboration skills, expertise in technology, innovation, and creative thinking skills, and an ability to solve problems. And that quote came from an article that I read by Larson and Miller, and the article was called 21st Century Skills, Preparing Students for the Future. And I found this article when I was researching about how we can help prepare our students for the future. And I felt that this quote was really useful because it sort of explains how these 21st century skills sort of fit into learning and how they can help promote this authentic learning. Because again, they're talking about creative thinking and ability to solve problems. And these are skills that are going to be useful both in and out of the classroom. Larson and Miller also highlight that Socratic ways of thinking, including taking responsibility for your own learning, are key for developing 21st century skills. If we can teach our students to take responsibility for their own learning in the classroom, they'll also be able to take responsibility for their own learning outside of the classroom after they have graduated. And this would create, again, lifelong learners, which is what we're trying to do. Now here I have some examples of curriculums which strive for authentic learning scenarios and teaching students how to think. Both of these examples come from Drake, and the first example discusses Vermont, whose framework states that every Vermont student should become a competent, caring, creative, productive, and responsible citizen committed to learning throughout life. And that is from the State of Vermont Department of Education. And I feel that these guidelines are super helpful in creating an authentic learning environment and students who want to think. And Drake also states that these guidelines clearly lead towards students becoming productive citizens, and productive citizens know how to think for themselves. They know how to be lifelong learners. Drake also gives the example of High Tech High in San Diego, California. This is a network of schools where assessment is performance-based and interdisciplinary teams design the curriculum. This method of teaching creates students that should be able to self-assess and self-critique. If students are able to do this, they will continue to be successful after school because they will be able to lead themselves on a learning journey without the need of a teacher to direct them. Here's some additional curriculum devoted to authentic learning scenarios and teaching students how to think. This came from Chapman and King, who present an overview of assessment strategies and curriculum ideas in their book, Differentiated Assessment Strategies. And one of the things they brought up is the problem-based model, which I found extremely similar to problem-based learning, which was brought up by Drake. And the problem-based model is focused on making learning more meaningful and applicable to the real world. So it's basically the same idea, just brought up in another source. And Chapman and King assert that by using this model, students can not only select their own problems to tackle, but they can also become productive learners when they can take charge of decisions about their own learning. And that is what we want to have happen. If students are in charge of their own learning, they will continue learning after they have left our classrooms. I also have examples of curriculum goals that support authentic learning scenarios and teaching students how to think, and both of these came from the videos that we watched for Module 3. The first one is Cheryl Hibben, who is the principal of the School of Digital Media Design, and she talked about their curriculum, stating that asking kids to do real-world things naturally requires them to go beyond what they know. You have to believe that engaging children in the content and making the content real and relevant is positive to learning, which I completely agree with that statement, and I'm very happy to see someone out there in the educational world trying to move forward on this idea of authentic learning environments and teaching students how to think. We also have Randy Nelson, the Dean of Pixar University, who discussed curriculum, pointing out that education has been a lot about accruing facts, and today getting facts is a lot easier than it's ever been, but doing something interesting in those facts. It's not so much in the points themselves, but in the relationships between them. And this quote really stood out to me because I think this is one of the main reasons that we really need to change curriculum and focus on authentic learning and teaching students how to think. You know, back before technology and the internet, it was difficult to find out facts if you didn't learn them in school or read them in a book. However, now our students know how to get those facts. So we need to teach them how to make connections and relationships between these facts and how to really think so that they can continue to grow the knowledge base and be intelligent people who can understand the vast amount of information that is now available once they have already left school. So next I'm going to go over my conclusion. From the evidence presented, I've shown that authentic learning environments prepare students to educate themselves throughout their lives. These learning environments can be created in a variety of different ways, including a focus on metacognition, problem-based learning, and 21st century skills. These teaching methodologies can be infused into the learning environment from the top down or from the bottom up. The top down is an example from Vermont, where they have it in their state framework and it is expected. And then from the bottom up would be the example of High Tech High, the charter school that started out and then is growing into a network of schools that really focuses on trying to not use tests and to have authentic learning environments. And then these types of learning environments are valued by numerous members of the educational community, which we saw from the video quotes that I went over. And in light of this information, I believe that it is undeniable that if the goal of education is to prepare the young to educate themselves throughout their lives, then education should be focused on authentic learning scenarios and teaching students how to think. And the last thing that I have for you today are my references. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and that it really helped you think about how important it is that we have authentic learning environments and that we are teaching our students how to think, especially if we want them to continue to be lifelong learners after they leave our classroom. Thank you for watching my presentation.